Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our Deep Q fans out there in the world. It's another episode of the Deep Q cast with your notorious hosts, Robert, Carlos, and Matt. Gentlemen, good to see you. I'm glad we're doing a happy hour session again. As much as I love breakfast and bagels and coffee, beers, it's kind of nice in the early
Always
evening.
preferred.
Always preferred. Sometimes, maybe one day, we can do like a brunch session. We can have like mimosas or something too in the morning. It doesn't always have to be coffee.
I'm more of a Bloody Mary fan, though. I don't know
Really?
why. I just always have been. Yeah,
It's a meal in a glass. Actually, that's a
fantastic.
good question. Are you more of the kind of guy who it's basically like a salad in a glass with vodka, or do you just like is it more of a minimal? Are you more of a minimalist with your garnish?
I'm a minimalist, but if I do anything, I like it spicy. So
Spicy.
horseradish and/or Tabasco in the Bloody Mary, please.
Yeah, I've seen it where people stick like the entire celery and it has a massive head of leaves and you're just like, what is going on? That's
Yeah.
that's a nice little
I've
meal.
even had like a fucking slice of bacon, which I did not mind, but it's like this is wholly unnecessary.
Yeah, like tomatoes, sausage, cheese. It's a salad. Like literally, it's a meal in a glass. They have no room for tomatoes. It's just vodka and a salad.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Actually, that's a great idea. I'm just gonna start like making. I'm gonna start a restaurant and just do like Bloody Marys, but without the tomato juice, and just have like vodka in the salad.
I think they already have that. It's called sweet green.
Sweet green. Ah, yes, the catnip for adults. Boys, how's it going?
It's been great. I feel like I've aged about 5 years in the last 2 weeks, but
Fatherhood catching up with you?
well, as you can tell, my children are adorable, but they're also filthy and bring back sicknesses wherever they go. So, our household is once again for like the 80th time this year battling some sort of cold or flu, and here we go again.
You're gonna be superhuman. Like imagine the antibodies you're building up.
So many antibodies, man.
So many.
Crushing it.
That's why I lick the subway railings once a week in New York City. Just kind of help me, build up
I missed that, dude.
You won't need to do that, Rob. They've developed super antibiotics now using AI, so you're going to be fine.
Oh, that's actually really fascinating, interesting. My wife grew up in a household where they were very easygoing with dosing out antibiotics. So that's kind of cool to hear that that's coming in place. Cool.
Just like
totally
passing out Z-Packs like it's candy.
just gummies, just like antibiotic gummies. Here, kids. Here. Some.
There you go. It's all good. Don't worry.
Oh man, guys! I know we were chatting last week about SEC rulings, and there was some news out. I know we can touch on a little bit later regarding Blackrock and ETFs, which I thought was really, really interesting and timely. But we ended the call, Matt, you'd spent a lot of time talking about FOMC and rates and CPI, and we had some news come out. Wasn't largely unexpected. Maybe you could share a little bit more about your thoughts around that. Yeah, start there. Talk maybe like see how that's impacted the markets post that announcement within crypto space.
So, I'll guess I'll just quickly back up for the price action to Friday last week. So there was a kind of unexpected and very large sell-off on Friday afternoon across crypto. It was around 5%, going right into the weekend. So that was like just before what time is it? Like 7 o'clock or something PM on Friday. And like the kind of thesis is there's a lot of selling pressure from some people that have been targeted by the SEC, like Robinhood, have to liquidate some of their securities now, which we now have to potentially call them. So there was a bunch of Matic or Polygon, as other people call it, and Sol that got liquidated and caused a massive sell-off in the entire market. So it mainly hit the alt market, but yeah, some of the main pairs got hit too. So Bitcoin and ETH were both sold off like 5%, and so that was before we even got to the data for this week. So that was a fun start to the week, Monday. And then Tuesday, there was CPI, and to be honest, it's kind of what we're expecting. So total CPI is a bit lower, which is great, not unexpected. But the real issue remains core CPI, and this is what we talked about last week. Core CPI was flat at 0.4% month on month. This has been the case now for several months. And I think it's echoed in also the core PCE numbers, which the Fed also managed to as well. And we've said this as well, but it's predominantly in the shelter index, was like one of the largest monthly increases for last month. So shelter seems to be one of the core drivers of the sticky inflation that we're seeing.
Well, good thing we can.
Yeah, I mean, so the main thing they look at there is like the owner's equivalent rent, or like the index for rent, which rose like 0.5% in May, and it did the same, like another 0.6% this month, which is pretty high. And I think we touched on this last week, that there's some things from like Zillow indices that maybe the housing sector is going to cool off a bit, and it typically does lag the most. So like fingers crossed. But then the big shock, really, or should I say not shock, is, and I said this last week, like I don't get why they don't just go. If the numbers are sticky, then just go, and you can always take it off again later. Like the market will appreciate that, but it's always harder to chase your tail. But anyway, like especially with last month where we had this like dovish hike, being like, oh, we're going to pause potentially next month. So it's like dovish hike, and then this month we've had like a hawkish pause where they've come out now with new dots that are indicating at least 2 more hikes this year. Why don't you just do one of them already?
Let's go into this just for a second, though. The FOMC decided to pause, right? Didn't raise anything. And Jerome Powell made a very clear statement to indicate at the beginning of the press conference what the dot plots were and how they're determined. And it was that to me was like actually kind of an interesting thing, because he was like, listen, we don't each governor puts in their expectation for rates independently, and then we aggregate them and then we show them. So this is just an aggregation of everything. There's no collusion. No messaging involved at all. This is just a pure, unbiased. And I'm like, bullshit. It's like, you guys have a closed meeting. Like, I'm pretty goddamn sure that generally speaking, if someone goes out of their way to tell you how unbiased a decision is, it usually means that it's not unbiased. So my view is that they paused, but the problem that you have as the Fed is you can't say, but by the way, we're paused, we're done hiking, everyone go, because they're still waiting for the effects of their rate hikes to kick in for employment and housing and all the other lagging sectors of core CPI that are there. So the worst possible outcome they can do is pause, tell everyone they're pausing, and the market just fucking boots off. And now everything's done. So they almost, by rule, have to pause, because I don't think they can really afford to continually hike before they like materially break something in the financial sector. But they also can't get over their skis in messaging. So this is pretty much almost exactly what they should have done. And the market believed it for approximately 20 minutes.
Yeah. And then it was like, no, okay, another hike's coming. Well, I think one takeaway that I had from listening to him speak was he kind of quoted their expectations for core PCE. That's one of the things that they say they managed to. So that's currently a little higher than 4.5%, and their medium FOMC participant forecast expected it to hit 3.9 by the end of the year. I'll touch on how terrible their longer term forecasts have been in a bit, but they're expected by the end of this year it will be down, at least 0.5%. Now, there's only 4 more FOMC meetings this year. We have 6 prints out, one at the end of June for core PCE. So my suspicion is if we don't see that thing coming down, like materially in the next couple of prints, there's going to be another hike. Like, there just has to be, because they're going to be so far off their own targets. Clearly, they're not doing enough, or something isn't trickling through. So it's really how long is that lag that they have to wait, and otherwise they're just going to be chasing this for longer.
I know we talk a lot about game theory in this and managing expectations, right? And obviously, it's all about expectations. How much follow through do you think Powell has in general in his prior messaging? Like, does he do what he says he will do? Because if he does, and he said there's going to be more rate hikes, then there probably will be more rate hikes, then, right?
This is actually perfect. Matt was showing me some analysis that he'd done. The TLDR version is fantastic follow through in the short term, absolute shit in the long run.
Yeah, basically we should be there's 70% confidence interval is pretty much where we've been at the high end for the last 3 years. If you look at the predictions, so only 30% of them were even in the ballpark. So I was joking we should get rid of 2/3 of the current FOMC committee and keep the few guys that were getting it right, because I guess actually they're the ones you really want to keep making decisions. It's the ones that are getting it right. But yeah, I mean, that's just based on the uncertainties from their predictions. Longer term, they're not good. Full stop.
Yeah.
Like their median is just so far from the mark. But short term, with guidance, like it's not that far off. But yeah, like what's going to happen in a year, 2 years from now? I mean, they haven't got a clue.
Okay, so long term is 1 to 2 years out, not necessarily 6 months, like year end.
Yeah.
Got it. Interesting.
Yeah. My personal view is that you should take him at his word for the next 6 months. And I truly believe that Powell wants to keep rates higher for longer. But, and this is the big but, that's contingent on the market, and particularly the bond market, not forcing his hand. And I'm just not sure that the bond market won't force his hand.
Yeah. So then, in that case, if short term he's more keeping his word, but long term their projections are shit. So then, if you're backing in your forecast, you would then expect then the 2 rate hikes that he is predicting, because that's within a 6 month time period, but then perhaps a more rapid unwinding later in the year as things degrade, which is kind of what the equity markets were expecting to begin with, right? Like markets in general.
But they can, remember, they'll cut to zero like that. Like they'll 2008 or whenever that first cut was, I think they cut several percent, right, in one go. It wasn't like the gradual increase we've seen. It was like, no, bang, we're pretty much at zero. And so they'll cut in a heartbeat if they have to, but that's only dire extreme circumstances. I think they'd much prefer to cycle it if they can, but it's one of those where until you actually break something, it's so long to get some of these legs to kick in that I don't know they'll see it. It's such a blunt tool that I don't.
Yeah. So for my nonprofit, Robert wants to buy a house think tank. Then I should, if I'm trying to, time the price degrade of home valuations going down because rates have gone up, and trying to time it with increased interest rate, obviously having to pay a higher mortgage, but being able to refinance perhaps in like 18 months as the rates goes to zero. So we're getting close to that really good inflection point where like home prices have kind of started to crater down. Okay, cool.
It feels like it.
Yeah. Okay, interesting.
I have a nonprofit with similarly aligned goals as yours, Robert. And
Carlos wants to buy a yacht foundation.
my think tank discussions have aligned on the fact that I think early to mid 2024 is going to be prime residential real estate buying time.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. Good to hear.
Yeah.
Good to hear. So then, after all this news came out, Matt, I know you mentioned markets kind of sold off on Friday last week. You mentioned how did things react to Powell's notes and commentary?
Same again. We're not. So actually, after FOMC, it was pretty benign. We
Hmm.
actually thought it looked like the news, the potential hike, doesn't really play well to risk assets. The crypto price action was relatively like nascent, I'd say. It wasn't until later in the day, again like 4 o'clock, when there was a massive amount of flow hitting the market. Like, well, we were speculating who it was. Like, we were guessing potentially it was the DOJ slash US government coffers selling up some of their Bitcoin. It looked
Hmm.
like that's where the price action hit first in Bitcoin, but yeah. So
There's
that was another 5% or so.
there's something very interesting though, because I feel like in like the equity markets, most other risk markets, the sentiment was, okay, we don't believe the Fed, buy the dip, risk on. And I feel like the crypto market just sort of collectively said, whatever. There's very little price action.
Hmm.
And that in and of itself can be a bit of a canary in the coal mine where you're like, okay, if every other risk asset is booting off right now, crypto is just like, and all the macroeconomic conditions tell you that it should be going one way. Like, then the price action is sort of telling you that the market knows something that you don't. And to me, what was sort of interesting was that the last several times that we've had positive economic prints, like the last two CPIs, where we had a positive print, we had somebody go onto Coinbase and market sell several thousand Bitcoin in the late New York afternoon session where there wasn't very good liquidity. So you've got to be either an absolute muppet to do that, just completely inept at your job as a trader, or you're intentionally trying to do something. And we can speculate who that was. I suspect it might have been like, potentially the DOJ, could have been Binance, it could be just some hedge fund out there with an axe to grind. Who knows? But I think the market was sort of expecting that, just because, like, how many times do you need to get run over on a positive economic print
Yeah.
before you start pulling your bids on an otherwise bullish sort of like economic thing? And
Hmm.
that ended up being the case. But post FOMC, we saw massive, massive, massive selling in Bitcoin on Coinbase. I think the net was something along the lines of like 3.4K Bitcoin were sold over
And
a
that was
very short time period, and you saw the price just crater.
and that was because of looking at how the price action has moved in the past because of more like technical factors. So that it almost becomes the market just becomes the expectance, or it's embedding that into their
No, I mean, let me put
trading
this
purpose.
way. Um, when the market comes to a consensus, or like when the market moves in a direction, you will find it grinding one way versus the other, right? Someone will get an idea, they'll put it on. Other people will see the price action, they'll kind of layer it in. You really only see the price move dramatically like that under two conditions. The first would be news hits the market and digests immediately. So that would be like FOMC surprises the market, and people will have their trading screens open and they will make a judgment call in that moment, and you'll see the price move dramatically. Um, the only other way that the price moves dramatically with no news in the market like that is if you get a uh, a forced market order,
Mhm.
right? And that's usually someone with a very large amount to do that does not care about best execution, right? Because if you wanted to move hundreds of millions of Bitcoin without moving the market, there are ways to do that. You could call up an OTC desk. You could work something passively over a long period of time. All of those wouldn't cost a 5% sell off, right?
Mm.
So, um, so typically, this is really sort of like the action of one large seller that does not care about best execution, And there's really only a small handful of people that have that many Bitcoin to sell, and that also don't care about price, best execution. So you can do the
Especially when
math and
you
say
got
who
it
it
for
might
free.
be. Yeah. So I
It's
do not
just free money.
believe, I don't believe anyone that says like, oh, the market decided to do this. It's like, no, the market doesn't just randomly decide 5 hours after 3 hours after a news event that it wants to sell off, right? Like that's total bullshit.
Mhm. Interesting. Okay, so much more technical factors kind of overriding fundamentals than in the markets around these news
Yeah.
events. Hmm.
So it sort of showed to me that the macro events of FOMC were, at least over the last 2 weeks, no longer the number one thing on investors' minds. It was
Hmm.
almost purely U.S. regulatory and response to the government's treatment of Bitcoin.
Mhm. Hmm.
Yeah, and I think we've also then, like today, especially had like the flip. So there's been some positive news from BlackRock, right? You mentioned this, Rob. Um, I actually missed the filing announcement. Class was like, yeah, they actually filed, and then the price started rocketing yesterday. Well, I saw the initial rumor, like, oh, they might be filing soon, and then it came up later that afternoon, right? Yesterday afternoon. So that's massive, right? If you have BlackRock actually secure that, I think you know a bit more of the technicalities, guys, but I don't know the differences with what they've filed relative to Grayscale and how likely they are to get through. But it's definitely not going to be something we're going to hear back in the next couple of weeks. I think it's going to take some amount of time, and then the question is, will it get approved or not?
Yeah.
So here's a brief detail of what happened. They filed it under a trust format. So I know there is confusion on Twitter about like, oh, it's not an ETF, it's a trust. Well, time out. Um, GLD and SPY are both classified as trusts. So it's the exact same legal structure as SPY and GLD. There was also some uncertainty as to whether or not it would be spot or futures. And this one was specifically for a spot exchange.
Yeah, which is cool.
That's really cool because one of the things that typically happens with a future is that if you do it with futures, one, it's subject to a lot of price manipulation around the close of those futures contracts, and because of the cost of rolling those futures, you've got to close out one position and enter into a new one, and those transaction costs and the negative carry on those futures positions can typically cause a pretty severe drain. So it makes the futures ETF a good speculative vehicle in the short run, but not a long run investment.
Oh,
So
you're bringing me terrible flashbacks from CFA studying backwardation and sweating.
backwardation and contango for the win, my
Yeah.
friend. But that being said, a spot is really good because it's effectively just a vehicle by which people can invest in Bitcoin through their, IRA, 401k. Large institutional money managers, as per their investment mandate, can also invest in those. So it's a huge thing. The other nice thing is relative to Grayscale, in its current format anyway, they will allow the ability to convert the ETF into physical. So redemptions of Bitcoin should actually basically keep the price honest between the spot ETF and the actual price of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So if this goes through, there's some really good things about this. I think the stats are that BlackRock has applied to create 576 ETFs in its lifetime, and it has been approved on 575 of those. So the odds are probably
What was
good.
the one that got rejected? Do you know? I'm curious.
It was one where
Was
it
an
was
ether
slightly,
ETF?
yeah. I believe it was one where they requested a rules change that allowed them to not disclose the holdings of the ETF every day because the underlying
Okay.
was illiquid, and they didn't want
Yeah,
the
to get
ability
screwed
for
on it.
people
Yeah.
to Yeah, and that was rejected because of lack of transparency. So
Fair enough.
my guess is that if BlackRock does this, they would only do so if and only if they felt like there is a reasonable chance that they would actually get it through.
I find if I was I've been following the ETF cases very closely. Full disclosure, I own ETHE and GBTC through Grayscale. So obviously those are trading at a discount to NAV. So it's just been really, I'm very bullish on that
Then you
outcomes.
must have been very happy because the NAV on those closed pretty dramatically on the news.
Yeah. Yeah. So I've been following this, and the thing is too, when you're filing, like it's a race once approval starts, because you want to attract as much volume as you can to the ETF. And so you don't want to be, if one ETF gets approved, you don't want to have to then file and wait. I think it's like 80 days or something like that for it to get approval. So I think a lot of people are kind of like putting their hats in the ring, waiting for an approval. This is interesting because all the research that I've done and listening to different lawyers and legal experts on this say that there is Grayscale has been suing the SEC because they have been denied repeatedly for a spot ETF while futures ETFs are allowed, but futures ETFs are based off of spot ETFs. So there's this disconnect. It's like, why is futures approved but not spot? And it seems likely that the SEC will lose. It seems, at least from a lot of these legal experts that I was hearing about, that it's more likely that the SEC might lose. But there's still uncertainty as to what that means. It doesn't immediately mean that a spot ETF will be approved. So I thought it was. I mean, obviously BlackRock, very large player. They understand the markets extremely well. They understand legalities. So maybe they know something that I don't regarding administrative changes, within the SEC. Obviously, most of the people that I've read about didn't really think that a ETF would be approved while Gary Gensler is chairman of the SEC. But who knows? Who knows what ace they have up their sleeve?
So there's a couple fun conspiracy theories out there. One of which is that Larry Fink basically fired a shot across the bow with this and said, "Hey guys, we're BlackRock. We donate a ton of money. We don't like the way you're handling crypto. We're going to launch this right now." My personal belief is that BlackRock are not activists, and that at least overtly they would not do that. I actually kind of side with you that, based on what I've been reading on the legal comments coming out from the judges in these cases, that the courts aren't really buying the logic that a futures ETF is totally normal and not subject to market manipulation. But a spot ETF is, which was the basis by which the SEC dismissed all other ones, which was like, that there's too much manipulation in this market. And the courts found that wholly inconsistent, as well they should, because it's a very inconsistent argument. Welcome to the world of the SEC under Gary Gensler. So I tend to believe with you. I think they're probably, they're seeing the writing on the wall, and they want to be one of the first in line as it happens. And so they're kind of putting their hat in the ring now. I was reading on the timelines of this sort of thing. It's not like you get approved, immediately. The timeline could be as long as like 240 days to get a yes or no on this. So, let's not expect a BlackRock Bitcoin ETF to launch tomorrow.
Yeah.
But it is sort of like laying the groundwork for an eventuality where this is a reasonably high probability trade. And I'd like to believe, Robert, you're a BlackRock alum, so you probably know better than anybody.
Yeah, me and Larry go out drinking on Wednesdays.
Exactly. They don't strike me as a firm that has in their DNA, making, low delta trades.
Yeah. I mean, obviously the legal, to me, what got me excited the most was the headline risk that BlackRock is taking by doing this. To me, that it was way more of of a financial risk for the firm than it is the legal cost for processing these things for a firm that size,
Yeah.
right? So like, who cares if I spend several $100,000 filing this and it doesn't go anywhere? But the headline risk is something real. Like, do we really want to associate our name with this? And the fact that they're willing to do that, to me, is very encouraging for the space. Even if they don't
Yeah.
necessarily have inside knowledge on when it's going, they just are. It's a pure just like game theory. Look, we need to. Everyone else is filing, so we should be filing too, just to make sure we're at the table. The fact they're willing to take that risk is encouraging to me. It's a good signal.
Yeah, because they're like 10 trillion AUM.
Yeah, something like that. Maybe
like
maybe less
the
now. Maybe
reputation-
it's 8 trillion. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, who knows, right? It's like, but like they're basically a good percentage of the U.S.'s total GDP is locked up in BlackRock funds at the moment. The reputational risk alone is crazy, and as such, they're known for being very conservative with these types of moves. So,
Yeah.
My guess is it's net a positive for the crypto industry, and the market seemed to respond very well.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'm super excited to see that come across. Boys, want to make sure we stay on time. We had something in the show notes that I should have asked you guys before we talked about this, but Prometheum, I have no freaking idea what that is.
Well, boys, I've discovered two recent loves. My wife and I are recently catching up on the last season of Succession. We're about a month behind everything, and I'm a big fan of Cousin Greg. I think that he is one of the show's best and funniest characters. The Disgusting Brothers are so terribly hilarious. And part of my crypto journey is that when I'm not watching Succession, I found myself also watching a ton of C-SPAN live on YouTube. And most recently, I watched the House. They had a committee meeting in the financial committee on the future of digital assets, and it seems to me like, so McHenry, like we talked about on the last episode, put out this bill, and I won't bore you with the details because we went through on the last episode. I refer you to that. But this was a public hearing where they went through, and they got actually a pretty serious group of characters. So to round it all out, they had, one of the partners at the law firm that I presume helped draft the bill. They had Jeremy Allaire, who's the CEO of Circle. They had the founder of Ava Labs, which puts out Avalanche. They had the guy that runs the regulatory agency, which oversees FX Spot for retail.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had Cousin Greg from Succession.
Literally or figuratively?
Figuratively. They had this guy named Aaron.
Damn it.
They had this guy named Aaron Kaplan, who I presume is just a shill for Gary Gensler. He looks like Cousin Greg plus like the villain from the Karate Kid movies if they were to have had a baby. And then that guy decided to form a cryptocurrency exchange. And their claim to fame is just 2 weeks ago, they were the first cryptocurrency exchange to be given full SEC and FINRA approval. And so the narrative really is like, listen, there's a path forward. Regulatory uncertainty? What are you talking about? We've got these guys here that came in. They clicked on the link on the website, and lo and behold, we now have like a fully regulated, entity that does all the things that you'd want to do in a crypto, currency exchange. The degree to which people in like the Elizabeth Warren Gensler camp were like reading prepared answers that were clearly outside of their depth. And then this guy was also reading back the responses as if they colluded before. I'm like, come on, just pretend like you weren't prepped beforehand with these like, random questions. Like this is very silly. And then to top it all off, what we find out through the course of the hearing is this. They are 6 years old and have not done a single cryptocurrency trade in their lifespan. You cannot trade Bitcoin. You cannot trade Ethereum because there's no regulatory clarity as to whether or not they're, SEC, they're cryptocurrencies which are registered with the SEC. So basically, you've got this total vaporware company coming in and being like, hey, guys, it's easy. Everyone can just go in and register. And then the takedown on Twitter afterwards was hilarious. We find out that basically like 20% of their company is owned by a CCP agent. And this is in congressional record. I'm not making shit up here. Like, I watched the full 4.5 hour thing. Like the guys taking this guy down were brutal. And this is the same company that did that rug pull where like Long Island Iced Tea rebranded themselves as a crypto company, like drove their stock price up and just fucking cashed out. They paid a bunch of money to this like broker dealer that also has ties with the CCP. It's like it was somewhat shameful because you would think to yourselves, if you're trying to push this narrative that, oh, it's super easy, we have this shining example of this stellar firm that has done this, you'd at least do some due diligence, right? You'd make sure that they
background checks
were somewhat serious people, like background checks and all that sort of stuff. Like this reminds me of when you have like the contestant on, like The Bachelor or something like that, and they get famous and they get on TV, and then someone does like a very cursory like check of their social media and finds that they've made like a bunch of racist comments in the past, and they have to come out and be like, sorry guys, I made a mistake, all that sort of stuff. It's just like, guys, like just do like the minimum amount of due diligence on these people.
But Carlos, that assumes that there was anybody else that could even be reasonably used. Like this is probably the best that they could find. This is all that they had.
No,
because there was literally
the
no
only
other.
person they
Yeah,
could
exactly.
find.
That's what I mean. It was like, yeah, okay, this guy's a sack. It's like, it's a thin veil, but it's the only veil we have, so we have to use the thin veil.
So the problem with it though is that you reach this point of absolute hilarity where they took that, and then just yesterday there was an interview with Gary Gensler in the Wall Street Journal where he was like, listen, we have a path forward. We have these guys. It's very clear that they did it correctly. So you can kind of tell they lined it up perfectly just to be like, all right, after we got all that smoke about this stuff, we approved a SEC approved exchange. We had this guy testify before Congress. We lobbed him some prepared questions with some softball answers. And then Gary Gensler interviewed with the Wall Street Journal and, was going off about how fantastic they were and, how there really is a clear regulatory path forward. So the PR from this has been so ham-fisted that it's almost laughable. Anyway, that's my 2 cents that I slipped in because cousin Greg was fucking fantastic.
That's I'd be super curious to see how that plays out, like how the media interprets all that. I haven't seen anything on media, so yeah, it'd just be like interesting how that gets spent.
Pretty bad. It doesn't even say what they offer. Which if you're going to register as an exchange, take any exchange, go on it, you'll see what their products are. That's the first thing that you can trade.
Yeah, this is what you can trade.
It doesn't show anything. It's like very strange.
We're a crypto firm and you can only trade stocks. So thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you can't trade anything. Like just there you go. Anyway, so it's been fun. Hopefully, my sincere hope is that the crypto market, as it usually does, has the memory of a goldfish, and in 2 weeks' time we will have forgotten that Binance and or Coinbase were sued, only to have another event to universally come along and crash the market by another 5%, because that's just the way crypto markets work. There's always a 5% drawdown off of some crazy news.
It's true.
Buy the dip is what Carlos is saying.
Yeah, BTFD.
YOLO, guys. This is a great episode. It's great chatting with you boys. Thanks. By the way, before we sign off, though, I want to hear about beers. Though I never asked you guys. Usually we do this at the beginning. I forgot. So we got
just a Sam Adams
proper
Boston lager. Very simple.
So vanilla. How dare you with my Heineken?
I've got a local beer. A half full bright. It's a blonde ale. So I'm nice in the summer beer mode. Yeah, even though it's raining cats and dogs outside, I've got a summer beer rolling.
You know, summer beer and colds work really well. I mean, it's much better than Dayquil. Kills all the germs. So you're doing the right thing, Carlos.
Oh, I'm mixing. I've got Dayquil and
perfect.
So
beautiful.
I'm set.
No dreams tonight.
Yeah, no side effects at all. Carlos is rolling over here.
We'll see him sleepwalking down the street. Yeah. See you later, guys. Great talking.
I'm off to go operate some heavy machinery now, boys. Have a good one.
See you later, guys.
All right, bye.
Get better.